When we as scientists conduct investigations, one of the things we need to do is to write a report about our findings so that other people can understand what we did and what we found out. Now, these reports can take a number of forms, but the easiest way is to arrange a series of subheadings as a template and then fill in those sections. So this is an example of the sections that you might use. Every experiment needs to have a title. Keep the title short, keep the title simple. The sort of keywords included in the title that you might find in a Google search. Just those 2 or 3 things that alert people to what the report's about. You should also include your details. By your details I mean your name and the date you did the investigation, anyone else who worked with you, your lab partner, or if you worked in a group, who the other participants in that particular investigation were. Scientific investigations have a particular purpose, and because they have a particular purpose, we're not just playing around in the laboratory, there should be an aim on your investigation. The aim is why you did the experiment, not because your teacher told you to, but what the background to that investigation is, why that area of study is important, what you already know in terms of theory about that area, so what you think will happen. As we get on in science, we might start to write a formal prediction called a hypothesis. The part of the experimental write-up is to allow other people to perform the experiment that you've just performed so that they can check your results. To make this easier, a list of materials, the equipment used, the chemicals you've used, any safety precautions that you took with those materials will make it very much simpler for somebody else to repeat the investigation. The method is a bit like the recipe in a recipe book. They're the steps you take doing the experiment. Remember, you're writing though for a scientifically literate audience. You don't need to put every single step. You're just putting in enough detail that allows somebody else with some scientific knowledge to do the same thing. So, for example, if you are heating up something or in a water bath over a Bunsen burner, it's okay to say that you set up a Bunsen burner and a water bath and heated whatever you heated. You don't have to go through all the steps of how you put the beaker over a tripod, you light the Bunsen burner. You don't need to put all that extra detail in, because you can assume anyone reading the report knows how to use a Bunsen burner. They know how to set up a water bath. They know in senior chemistry what a titration is. You don't have to explain that, just the details they would need to repeat the experiment. Make sure though that you include the variables. The thing that you've changed from one trial to the next trial, that's your independent variable. The thing that you're measuring, that's your dependent variable. Your write-up has to identify those things which you've tried to keep the same. You've heated up a chemical with another chemical. You've observed the colour. What have you tried to keep the same from one trial to the next? Perhaps the volume. Also, most experiments, as you go through in science, will discover, will have a control. That is a set of conditions that you're going to compare your results to. Make sure you include what the control, what those preset set of conditions are. After you've put a method down, you should have your results. Your results can be observations. It smelt. It was blue in colour. But also, a lot of your results will actually be measurements that you've taken. And the simplest way of presenting that information, the measurements you've taken, is with a table or a graph. Remember, in 95% of graphs done in science, the independent variable goes along the horizontal x-axis, the dependent variable will go on the y-axis. If you're drawing a graph, you've still got to follow the rules of graphs that you've learnt in mathematics. You have to give your graph a title. You have to give your axis labels. After you've put your results, then you have to say, what do the results mean? Some sort of explanation of what happened, what you found difficult, how you might improve the experiment next time, how the experiment tends to suggest one thing, but if you varied it slightly, you can do a further study to find out more about the theory. Finally, your report should include a conclusion. Relate your findings back to the aim. If your aim was to investigate how much sugar you can dissolve in hot water compared with cold water, your conclusion should relate back and say, we found that, as we predicted, more sugar would dissolve in hot water than cold water. It's always a good idea. Read the aim of the experiment before writing the conclusion, so that you can make sure that the two have the same, that the two are related to one another. So we've gone through those parts. I've taken 2 reports from students just to see how they fit in those parts. The first one's a grade 7 report, which was about dissolving sugar. How much sugar will dissolve in hot water compared with cold sugar? We've got a date there and a title. It hasn't got the name of the people doing it because I've taken that off. The students listed the materials they've used, and they've listed how they performed the experiment in terms of a method. There's quite a nice diagram of the equipment that they've used to help somebody identify how the equipment was set up and perform the experiment again. Notice the diagram that they've done a cross-section. This student's not Picasso. He can't draw a beaker and a Bunsen burner. But by sketching them in cross-section, and using a ruler quite nicely actually, they've been able to show how that equipment would have been set up. There's a small section of results. The results, because they've only got the amount dissolved in cold water, the extra amount dissolved in after they've heated the water up, so the total amount, they haven't had to really put a table of the results because they've only got 3 numbers. They've just listed what they are. And they've then discussed their results, what they found out, that they could have improved it. They could have used a thermometer to actually measure the temperature of the water, as opposed to just saying the water was hot now. So they've listed an improvement, and they've also concluded that they were able to dissolve 3 times more sugar in hot water than cold water, which relates back to their original aim, which was to say how much sugar will dissolve in hot water compared with cold water. They've actually related the number, they've not just said more. So I quite like that. I've got a year 9 report, I think this was, which hasn't photocopied very well, but here we go. We've got a scientific investigation, cooking with solar energy. Again, I've taken the name of the student off, that was there, and the date was. Their aim to investigate whether energy from the sun can be used to cook food. So there's not a quantitative amount, and there's not really a quantitative prediction. They have said I think the solar oven temperature will rise over 65 degrees centigrade. They've not really said whether that's hot enough to cook food. Or put a background piece in there. I would have liked to have seen them put a background piece in there about how cooking food requires energy, and that a renewable, cheap source of energy is solar energy, which is why they're doing that investigation. So they're not actually related to the theory that we've been talking about in class. They have put all the materials that they've used, and they've put their method, their procedure, as a series of steps: step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, etc., which makes it very easy to follow. You could just write a paragraph or two, putting dot points or numbered points like this does actually make it a lot easier to do. They have got their results. They've got had the oven going for quite a while. If you can see, they've had it going from 10 o'clock to 25 past 11, and they've noticed how the temperature has gone up during that time. So they've got their measurements. This is what's changed, the independent variable, because they can't change how quickly time goes by. This is the dependent variable, the thing that they've measured, the temperature. There's no mention in here of any controls. It would be nice if they'd set up a thermometer next to the solar heater to see if the ambient temperature went up at all. It may well be that between 10 o'clock in the morning and 25 past 11, the air temperature may have risen considerably that day anyway. If you notice, 38, it was a very hot day when we did this experiment to start with. But it may well have reached, 40 or so by lunchtime, so it might have gone up another couple of degrees. So not all this temperature rise is due to the solar oven. So a control to compare it against would have been a good idea. They've got a discussion. There's no conclusion, no separate conclusion. But if you read the discussion, this student has actually said it was found the temperature of the oven rose to 100 degrees. It was also found the hypothesis was correct. They're related in their discussion back to the hypothesis. So this is actually a discussion and conclusion paragraph in one. They do actually talk down here about of the ovens tested by the different groups. So they've actually compared to different ovens, and they've spoken about the design of the oven, how it could be improved perhaps with insulation, more reflective surface. So they've put all the stuff from the normal discussion section and conclusions together, but they have included all those sections without having the additional heading. So you can see both those reports have got a title. They did have details. I took the details out so you didn't know who students who were. They had an aim, some sort of prediction. They didn't put very much background information. If it was a Year 10 report, I would expect considerably more background information relating it to the theory. Both had enough materials and method discussion to allow somebody to repeat the experiment. Both listed some measured quantities in a table or as a list, and both of them had a discussion and a conclusion. So they were both complete reports, but done to different standards. And I'd like, for a start, you to just use those series of subheadings as a framework for listing your reports, and then we can go into more detail later. Thank you.